A happy Chodesh Adar to everyone. To all the ladies and gentlemen in cyberspace who can see me and I can't see them, and those that have braved the New York rains to come. Okay. So we titled this class as Can Joy Be Measured? The reason being because this being a leap year, what's called in Hebrew a Shana Mu'beres, a pregnant year, literally, because of the discrepancy between the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, which is 11 and a half days. The lunar cycle is around 355 days, 354 and some hours. And the solar, of course, is 365. And the Torah tells us to celebrate Passover both on the 15th of Nisan, which is determined by the moon, because the moon is determined as the new moon, the new month, and in the month of spring, which is determined by the sun, by the seasons. Hence, we derive that we should reconcile the two, and to do that, the Hillel and the sages of old, who are brilliant astronomers, calculated that every 19 years you create 7 leap years. So if you add a month of 29 days and an extra month of Adar every 7 times, every 19 years, you keep more or less the 11 and a half deficit balanced. So basically every 3 years approximately there's a leap year, which is 29 days. So it counteracts the 11 and a half times 3, 33 day difference between the cycles, and that you keep doing that every 19 years. It's called a Purim Katan, a small cycle, the short cycle. You end up having a balance that the seasons and Passover will always be in the spring, and these holidays will follow. Shavuos will always be right before the summer. Sukkot will always be in the autumn, and so on. That's the technical part. I've discussed many times what the deeper meaning of this is, because it's about reconciling the lunar and solar personalities that each of us have, but that's not for now. But as a result of that, we are now an extra month of Adar. It's called Adar Rishon, the first Adar, and next week we'll be entering the second Adar, which is when we celebrate Purim. So here's an interesting question, Talmudic question. What do you do with Purim? When do you celebrate Purim? Purim is in Adar, and it's on the 14th of Adar, Shushan Purim, the 15th of Adar. Do you celebrate it on the first Adar or on the second Adar? So the truth is, it should have been in the first Adar, because if you think of a Shana Mu'beres, which is the extra month, the second Adar. Every month here there's an Adar, we're adding a second Adar. So the logic would dictate that Purim should be in the first Adar, because that's the natural Adar. The second Adar is the one that comes only every few years. However, there's an exception, because it says Mismach Geula LeGeula, which means since Purim reflects and represents a redemption from the hands of Haman, Decree, and Achashverosh in Persia of old, and the next month, Nisan, is the redemption, Geula, from Egypt. So Mismach Geula LeGeula, we join the months of redemption, which is that redemption should come 1 month after the next. And hence, instead of, if Purim was celebrated the first Adar, it would be split by a month, which is an interesting discussion of its own. Why is it so important that the 2 months in a row should be redemption? Which tells you, also, you can learn many psychological lessons from that, and spiritual lessons, that when good things happen, it's good to bunch them together, because then you maximize their effect. As we know, when you get inspired, it's easy to dissipate. Whereas if you keep the inspiration, and you can move one inspiration right to the next inspiration, from one party to the next party, it's easier to maintain the enthusiasm. So on a very basic level, Purim's joy is followed immediately by Passover's joy, so you have a more intense and synergetic experience, which again is a discussion of its own, but it's just an interesting thought. Because at the end of the day, if we celebrate Purim the first Adar, it still would be a celebration. But it's about celebration should be adjoined if possible. Okay, but that leaves us with the fact that in a way the first Adar is like it was deprived of a holiday, and we know even though months are not human beings, But you find in different midrashim that speak about that when a month is deprived of a holiday, God compensates it. So the question is, why should the first Adar lose out now? It loses a holiday. It would have always had the holiday because of this, because of the leap year. It moves to the second. So what we say is that there's in the first month of Adar we honor it and commemorate with what's called Purim Katan. Purim Katan, the small Purim. So there's a small Purim, and Purim Gadol would be the major Purim, which is the Purim, the full-blown Purim as we know it. So it's interesting, even though the only real thing we celebrate on Purim Katan, which was this week, what day was it? It was yesterday. Yesterday, Purim Katan. We don't say Tachnun, which is a certain prayer that you say during regular weekdays, but not during holidays and special days. And that's that, and Shushan Purim Katan as well today. So it's a symbolic, but it's named, is given a special name, Purim Katan, which is exactly, of course, 30 days before the next Purim, which is the main Purim. So what's the significance of this Purim Katan? And thinking of the name, small Purim, so I thought to myself, small Purim is known for joy. So what is it, like a small form of joy? And hence the title of the class, Can Joy Be Measured? Is there such a thing as small joy and large joy? Isn't joy just joy? And when you really enter into the discussion, you realize that joy is one of the mysterious forces in life. And everyone would pay the big $1 million question, how can you become a more joyous and happy person? Or are we hardwired this way? So I thought it's a good opportunity, being that we're in a month of joy and increasing joy, and a month that's going to lead to another month of joy and a greater joy. It would be a good topic to address the issue of joy in the context, can joy be measured? Because obviously joy is more of a qualitative thing, not a quantitative. And so why would you even call something a Purim Katan? And every word in Hebrew is precise, and the word Katan teaches us things, which we'll soon discuss. So in general, when it comes to things like joy and happiness, many people would think, it doesn't really matter what joy is. The most important to know is how to do it, not the what, the how. It's very nice to say joy is a good thing. We all know being a joyous person is a great thing. Being a happy person, upbeat, someone that looks forward to things, someone that just has a positive disposition. The big question is not whether it's a good thing, is how. How do you get there? So most of the books, and best-selling books or not best-selling books, and the methodologies, you have books, How to Become a Happy Person, 10 Ways to Joy, 10 Ways to Happiness, etc., etc. They all focus on the techniques and methods of what you can do to become joyous. But Judaism and Torah, what it does, which is even a broader perspective, is that before we talk about the how, we talk about the what. Because it's impossible to find something unless you know what you're looking for. If you can't define what joy is, you may be looking your entire life for something that doesn't exist, or exists in a distorted way. So the first thing we need to know is, what exactly does joy mean? What is happiness? Are the ingredients of it? And then we could say, okay, now that I know what it is, how do I access it? So it's a good question to ask yourself. Do you consider yourself a happy person? I've asked this question to many people. Sadly, most people say no. Many people say I experience times of happiness, but overall I'm not a happy person. And when you start analyzing why people are not happy, often it's circumstantial. They say, my life has not been a happy life. I may have been born a happy person, but my life has not been happy. Either my parents were always anxious, maybe financially, maybe the schooling, the friends I've had. The world in which we live, I was exposed to all kinds of hostile, negative energy, and it's made me not a happy person. I go to work, I have to work, but I'm not happy there. There are people there that are miserable, that make you miserable. This is unfortunately a common, I'm not going to rate statistics, but probably most people would say they're in the happy scale, would not be on the top of the scale, but more on the bottom of the scale, or somewhere in the middle. And it's interesting, most people define happiness by the activities that we do. If I'm involved in happy things, I'm a happy person. Very few people will talk about whether you're a happy person no matter what. Because remember, happy people are happy even when there's challenging situations. So the question really is happiness and joy a state of being or an action? In English, is it a verb or a noun? A verb would mean it's an action. When you do happy things, you do things that make you happy. You eat a good meal. That's on a short term. You make a lot of money. You achieve something that you consider to be a goal. It makes someone happy. If you don't achieve the goal, they're not happy. But in truth, as we'll soon discuss, real happiness, like all real things, are not a matter of actions. They're a state of being. So let's go back to what I said at the beginning. I said that children are born happy. Is that true or not true? The answer is absolutely. There are exceptions where children may have some chemical, or sometimes during pregnancy they may have been deprived of something, and sometimes their mother's behavior affects them. But generally speaking, across the board, children are born happy. They smile naturally. They giggle. They grow up in their early stages as happy people. So the question is, if happiness is their natural default state and it's not acquired, so what happens? So obviously what happens is they're exposed to unhappy people. So if you have a natural happy person exposed to unhappy people who are also have an influence on the impressionable child, which means, let's say a naturally happy child is born to unhappy parents, what's going to happen? After a while, the child will begin to measure and slowly subdue and repress their natural happiness. When you start seeing people around you in a bad mood, you also become in a bad mood. You start seeing that people scowl at each other, or they're angry, or they are bicker, or all the things that signify unhappiness. So a child starts to mimic that. That becomes the standard, which of course is tragic, that a happy-go-lucky, a free-spirited child suddenly is assuming the unnatural unhappiness of adults. But that's the story. That's the story of life. And that's usually what happens. So essentially, the truth is then, if you think of it this way, that means that a human being's natural status quo is a happy one. It's a neutral one. And if you do happy things that make you happy, you become happy. If you do things that make you sad, you become sad. No, we're not a clean slate. A child, as soon as it's born, is in a happy state. So the question is, what does that mean? So let's introduce another. The word simcha is the Hebrew word for joy. The word happiness can be simcha. Happiness is also, let's see, what other words we find for happiness? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go into a Hebrew lesson right now. But there's a word that is a very good word in English. It's called being content. And content doesn't mean mistapik b'mud, that you are satisfied with a minimum. Content means is an inner sense of being self-contained and comfortable in your own skin. So let's talk about that. Happiness is a direct outgrowth of being comfortable in your own skin. When you're comfortable in your own skin, you don't have to do anything to make you happy. You're just comfortable as is. A person who's not comfortable in their own skin, the only time they get happy is when they do things that make them happy. Because their natural state is not happiness. Children are comfortable in their own skins. You know why? Because they're not conscious of themselves. They're not conscious of their sexuality. They're not conscious of their looks. They don't check how they look out in the mirror all the time. They're not conscious of themselves in any given way. There's a certain pure innocence in children. They're not conscious, which is interesting, because most of us would think being not conscious is like what's the word for it? An inferior state. No, being conscious of yourself is actually an inferior state, and we have an actual proof of this in the Bible, in the Torah. What does it say? That Adam and Eve were put in the Garden of Eden, and they were naked. They had no clothing. And lo yizbeishashu, they were not ashamed. Why? Because they were like newborn children. They were created 20 years old, but their innocence was like a newborn child. What's there to be ashamed of? Is a tree ashamed of it being naked? Is an animal ashamed? Is the snow ashamed? Is the bird ashamed? No, because that's who you are. That's how you were created. What's there to be? Why should there be any consciousness? This is how you were created. This is what you do. Then what happens is called Chet Tzadas. They suddenly ate from this tree called the tree of good and evil, tree of knowledge of good and evil. which many commentators, what was this tree about? There's a tree of life. Eat from the tree of life. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. So there are many explanations. I'll just go with Maimonides' explanation, and that is they became conscious of themselves. And once you become conscious of yourself, then you already have experienced shame, and that's when they covered themselves. They suddenly realized, arumim, that they were naked. They realized they're sexual creatures. Up till that point, their consciousness was only that they were God's creation, Yitzir Kapov Shal Kodesh Baruch Hu, which means they are the handiwork of God. And what's there to be embarrassed about? Every part of you, from head to toe, is the handiwork of God. Your only job now is to use your resources to fulfill the mission of your life. But suddenly they tasted from this tree. Now they became separate. It became what we call the duality of subject and object. Me and my experience. I always use this analogy, for example, when you put your hand in water. So it's very obvious that a dry hand begets wet, and you know about it, the sensation of wetness. But let's do a little mind game. Do fish feel that they get wet? Does water get wet? The answer is no. Water is wetness. It's a state of being. If something is dry, so then this dryness now is getting wet. But water is wet. Now, when it comes to, let's say, knowledge or other experiences in life, there are experiences in life that we acquire. As long as you acquire it, there's you acquiring something else. But then there comes when you're in the zone, you become one with it, which is why Isaiah, the prophet, says that Mashiach comes. Mola orez deis Hashem kamayim layom mechasim. The world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. What's the point? That's abundant knowledge, but it's more than that. Waters cover the sea means that everything is submerged in the water. You no longer see a seabed. We see the sea, we only see the water. But beneath it, we know there's mountains, there's valleys, peaks, volcanoes, earthquakes. There's a whole culture that's even more complicated than the culture on earth. Kol ma sheyesh b'yabasha yesh b'yam, the Talmud says. Everything that's on land is in the sea, which implies that the sea has more than the land, because it doesn't say everything that's in the sea is on land. So the sea has more creatures and more species than we do on earth. But they're all submerged in another reality, which is why when we go to the mikveh, we call it tefillah. Not tefillah with a pei like prayer, tefillah with a beis. We submerge ourselves. The Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Mittler Rebbe brings in Siddur, tefillah is the letters habitl. Why? Because what means bittel? Bittel means one entity gets submerged completely in another entity. And that's why every drop of us has to be submerged. I remember once giving a class, and someone asked about why is it that when you put, let's say, you submerge vessels, kalim, in a mikveh, which you also have to do new containers, new vessels. You're supposed to take off every sticker. So someone said one didn't take off a sticker. They told me he has to do it again, take off the sticker. He says, who cares? A little sticker on the bottom of the pitcher. So I told him, I said, when you submerge something, it's not quantity. Even if one drop of you, imagine I said to him, God forbid, the life force in your body touched 99% of you, but one part of your toe was no life force. What would happen? It would become infected. That's gangrene. It would become infected and an illness, and it would become something dangerous. But it's only one iota out of a whole body. Because when it comes to submersion and bittul, if it's not total, it's not at all. It has to be total. So what does that mean? It's the submersion of ourselves in a complete environment of that is a pure environment. So it's interesting. The Talmud says that the world was created mayim b'mayim. When the world was created, everything was submerged in water. That's why you needed on day 2 God to separate the higher waters from the lower waters. Because there were no oceans in day 1. There was no land. It was complete water. The question is, that's why. If you're anyway going to separate it, why complete? Why? So it says because the world as it would enter a world of duality, like it would after the eating of the tree of knowledge, you have to always begin with a unity that gives you the resources, the power to then go out there and experience the duality and reconnect the separate entities that exist. So it's interesting, in the microcosm of the human being, how do our lives begin? You ever think about it? Completely submerged in embryonic fluids. For 9 months, the fetus is an embryo inside of the uterus, and it's inside a fluid. Exactly like the macrocosm of the world. And what's happening during those 9 months? It's being completely protected, submerged in its mother's womb, being taught the entire Torah. And then when it enters this world, it makes, on a conscious level, we forget, with the goal of reconnecting and creating a world that's filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea again. So we live in a world where there's a duality of land and sea, of dry and wet. But in truth, knowledge, ultimately, the goal of knowledge is not just to know, but to become. You can know something, and then you become it. It's very, very different. You can know something is good, and then you become a good person. So there's doing actions that are good actions, and there's becoming a good person. It's very different. The same thing with knowledge. There's knowledge that we acquire, we learn it, but it's not us yet. Then there becomes a point where you own it, and you become one with the knowledge. So Adam and Eve, before eating from the tree of knowledge, they were one. Then they suddenly recognized, when they ate from the real knowledge, they were margish. They sensed themselves. As soon as a child begins to sense itself, it's ready to become self-conscious. And the world, was the birth of insecurity was born. The birth of self-consciousness, being self-conscious. As I said earlier, children are not self-conscious. They're completely comfortable in their own skin, completely. Adults are self-conscious. You come to a room, you're right away wary, who's there? How will I be perceived? Am I dressed right? Do I look right? Someone that's completely comfortable in their own skin does not have that issue. Where they are what they are. We call it in Hasidic language a pnimi, or even better, an atzmi. What's an atzmi? If atzmi is not a superficial person who lives by his reputation in the eyes of others. He exudes confidence from within. He or she, you see what you see is what you get. The person is so comfortable with themselves, they can just be. And that's that. Most other people are busy posturing and trying to fit in. Do I look good? Will I be respected? Will I not be? We're always looking, what face do I have to put on? What mask do I have to put on? What garment do I have to dress to fit in? Which is why the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, begins, Al yebush mipnei hamaligim. Don't be embarrassed for those that mock and laugh. Many people say, "Why? I'm not embarrassed." It's not true. We all are conformists to some extent. We don't want to stand there. Yes, we want to be seen as unique, but not too unique. You know, like they say, when a crazy guy gets money, they call him, instead of crazy, they call him eccentric. You know, so we'd like to be seen as colorful, as unique, but not too unique, because that's already bordering on crazy, or abnormal, or too different. Different, but not too different. And yes, people are very concerned about this, because even the students of Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai, on his deathbed, he had to tell them, halavai, may it be that you should fear God as much as you fear people. Even him to his great students, because that's the world in which we live. And children, as we're born, we don't have this self-consciousness, then we become self-conscious. That's why they're joyous children, because joy is a direct outgrowth of being comfortable in your own skin. Is it conceivable that a soul, for example, in heaven should be depressed or anxious or fearful? Why would it be? It lives in the world of the spirit. It's a spiritual entity doing what it has to do. Why should there be any sense of concern? Where is there concern in our world, where there's a world of duality, where we're not submerged in the waters? We live in a world where we sense ourselves, and there's you, and there's others. There are times where we can sense, we call it being in the zone. I've described that a number of times. Being in the zone that you're so immersed in something, you don't even know you're doing it. Example would be, if you're a reader of books, you sometimes read a book and you get so absorbed by the story, you don't even realize you're turning pages. You don't even realize you're reading a book. You see the passion. You could see people getting excited, smiling. And you're reading a page. We're not talking about necessarily a visual experience. You're reading pages, you're turning them, and it's a page turner, as they say. Suspense. It can make you sweat. It can make you heartbeat. It can make you smile. It's amazing. Why? Because you're completely submerged. That's tefillah, bittul, completely submerged in it. Another example, music. You see people put a headset on, and they completely block out the whole world. They plug in, plug out everything else, unplug everything else, I should say, plug in, and you can just, if you're alone, you can start dancing and singing, you won't even be conscious. And someone will come in and say, what are you doing? And then suddenly you get conscious. Some people sing in the shower. I'm not going to ask you if you do. And they're not conscious. As soon as they think, if they thought they were being broadcast, I'm not saying necessarily visually, but audio, they would not sing with that type of uninhibitedness. But there's something very refreshing about being uninhibited. Would you agree? Where you can just be yourself. I mean, true love would be that way, where you're not conscious because of your spouse or because of others, because you're just there. But we don't live in a world like that. We live in an unnatural world. If we were connected to God, if we were like fish in water, what's there to be conscious about? You're doing what you should be doing. You're connected. But because we're disconnected and we're looking for our so-called calling, that duality creates self-consciousness. Because here's you, and the question is, are you where you belong? So you wonder, am I doing what I should be doing? Am I connected? That's why when Adam, after the sin, what does God say to God comes, it says, comes into the garden, and what does he say? He asks, Ayeka, where are you? So the famous question was asked by a minister, a Russian minister, the Tsarist Russia's minister of the Alter Rebbe when he was imprisoned before Yitzhak Kislev. What is this question? God did not know where he is. What are you asking Ayeka? Where are you? So the first Alter Rebbe gave the answer Rashi gives. The minister says, I know what Rashi says. I want to know what you say. And the story goes, he stood up. The Alter Rebbe was a formidable, tall man. He stood up and looked at the minister in his eyes and said, this is the question, that the eternal question God asks every human being. And what's the question God asks? Ayeka. You're so many years old. Where are you? What have you accomplished? Are you fulfilling your calling? Sometimes you sit across somebody and you see them and you ask them, where are you? Why are you asking them, where are you? You see them. You want to know, I don't see you, not with me. You're wandering off somewhere. Your mind is elsewhere. Your heart's elsewhere. You're not with me. So you say, where are you? What do you mean by, what do you mean? I'm sitting in my chair. No, you're not with me. You're not there. Something else is going on. That's a disconnect. Today we live in a world where there's so much disconnect, people busy with their texting and their gadgets. You can't get their attention. When's the last time people have an eye-to-eye conversation? Completely there. It's called being present. Completely present. We're always preparing for the next place. Where do I got to go? What is that? That's a sign of a person who does not be comfortable where they are. So they're wondering, maybe I don't belong here, maybe I have to be moving, maybe I'm here too long. It's like someone running from a fire. They're not comfortable where they are. The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, was once in a Farbrengen. He was leading a Farbrengen. And as we know, in a Farbrengen is punctuated, the talks, the Maimer, the discourse, by song. The Chassidim, the students were singing L'chaim. Then there came the song that was sung before the Rebbe would deliver a formal discourse, formal Maimer. And the Rebbe Rashab sensed that the Bochrim, the students, were singing faster than usual because they wanted to hear the Maimer. So they were like singing a little faster. They couldn't wait to hear the new discourse. And instead of delivering a discourse, he delivered reprimanded them. A beautiful talk. And he said, Apnimi, dorten wo is in Ganzen. Meaning an internal person who's really where they belong, they are where they should be, is never thinking about what's coming next. The song is a preparation for the thing, but while we're singing, you should be singing as if nothing else is happening. Then comes the next stage, the song leads to the discourse. There's no such thing as rushing from one thing to the next, because this is what you should be doing right now. Why are you looking over your shoulder and seeing whether this is the best, and maybe there's something else? Be comfortable with yourself, go the flow, do your research, do what you have to do, but be there, be present. But because we're insecure, and we don't always admit it, we are never sure of ourselves. We second guess ourselves, and we wonder, and maybe I'm missing out something, and so on. So the Rebbe was telling them, sing the song. Now we're in the song. After you finish the song, will come the discourse. The Rebbe cites this in different places, brings in Ragat Shover, the Rabbi Yosef Rosen, a great Talmudic sage. Talmudic, I mean, he wasn't at Talmudic times, he lived in the 20th century, but he was a great sage of the Talmud. Brilliant. And he said that in the temple, there was no such thing that was a preparatory for something else. Even when they walked to the Mizbeach, to the altar, because that was the only way to do the service of the altar, the walking itself is also a holy act. Because in holiness, everything, even something that is a preparation for something else, is holy. We think of Erev Shabbos. So Erev Shabbos is a day preparing for Shabbos. But Erev Shabbos has its own value and its own holiness. Yes, it's true, it's a preparation, but in holy things, preparations themselves also become an end in themselves, as that story I just told. So bottom line is, joy is a direct outgrowth of a person being comfortable with themselves. So then joy takes on a whole different thing. Most of us think of joy, of merrymaking and celebrating and dancing and singing. Yes, of course, that's an expression of joy. But you could have somebody dancing and singing and they're miserable. And they just sing because that's what everybody's doing. Go to a wedding, everybody's happy, even if they're dancing. I'm not saying they shouldn't dance. They should still dance because sometimes actions lead to feelings. You dance long enough. Like one of the Rebbes once said, I don't know, I'm not sure who said it, he said, people say, I can't be happy. What was the expression? If I were happy, then I would celebrate. And the Rebbe said, if you would celebrate, then you'd be happy. So sometimes it comes down to being there. So in this context, really joy is yes, can be expressed as a verb. But let's say when you're marrying off your child. You married off a child, right? More than one, as of others have. You can't describe the joy that you have and the celebration, and you dance and you sing, and it's like without limits. But where is it rooted? It's not rooted in the dance. It's rooted in an inner sense of satisfaction. Nachas. How do you translate nachas? Pride. But it's much more than that. It's the life of your child. All the years, everything, all the work and all the upbringing comes together. Your child is going to move on and build their own family. It's hard to even put into words. But it's something that's coming from a deep part of your soul. And at that time, you feel completely you're there. I was once at a wedding, and I saw the parents, especially the father, was not happy. His own child's wedding. And I happened to know who he was. Yeah, because he was so consumed with his own self, couldn't even think about it, because he's not comfortable in his own skin. So his own child's wedding, he couldn't even be natural. That's a tragedy. But there are times where all of us are so absorbed, as I said, in the thing that you don't feel yourself, and that's the happiest moments of your life. So here's the interesting formula paradox. The more you feel it, the more you're conscious of it, the less real it is. The less conscious you are of it, the more you just experience it, the more real it is. That's how it is. Which brings me now to the concept of Purim Katan. So interesting talk in 1981, the Rebbe spoke for the children. It was a Purim Katan with two others that year. It's also a Hakel year, for that matter, which is like this, the 8th year after the 7th, after the sabbatical, was a year Hakel, a year of gathering where the Jews would gather during the time of the temple, and the king would read for them Torah and instill in them divine awe, etc. So that's Purim Katan. The Rebbe spoke to the children, and of course, Katan is children. Katan is small, and spoke about the quality of smallness. What did he say? He said that you find in Judaism, Katan, usually people would think Katan as being inferior. You say small. Purim Gadol, the large Purim, the great Purim, small. It symbolizes, indicates on paltry, minimal, less. And yet you find a whole section in the Talmud in Chulin that talks about all those that are called small. And let's just give a list of what they are. The small luminary, Moir HaKatan, the moon. David Hu HaKatan, David is called the small one. Yaakov Hu HaKatan, Jacob is called the small one. And the Rebbe explains that this smallness is not considered inferior. It's actually considered a great virtue. We Jews count by the moon. And we're similar to the moon. We're the fewest among nations. Is that a quality, or is that a virtue or a vice? So many people would say, well, it's just few numbers. No, the atamat is the uniqueness. That here the smallness signifies humility, bittul. The moon is small because it's what is called in Hasidic and Zohar's language, less lamagamoklim, has nothing of its own. The moon is just reflecting the light of the sun. But it reflects it in a way that the sun itself can never convey. For example, you see two people who love each other, you'll never see them staring at the sun. They'll stare at the moon. It has a romantic element, a certain mystique to it. And we count to the moon. The moon cycles are like the Jewish people. Our ups and downs, we're constantly changing, and then at the point of seeming extinction, reborn again. They should be renewed like you, the moon. Like it, the moon. So the cotton is a symbol in Jewish thought of humility. And humility is one of the most powerful forces in life. Humility should not be confused with low self-esteem. Should not be confused with an annihilated or a tread upon personality, like a shmat, a skupa nedreses, like a doormat. Humility is strength. Is the strength of suspending yourself in face of something greater than yourself. Moses was the humblest man that walked on earth. That's katnus. Seeing yourself as insignificant, not insignificant in a bad way, insignificant in the face of a much larger reality. And then you become an extension of that larger reality. In Hebrew, anav means humble, shafel means low self-esteem. Low self-esteem means you think you're nobody. You're worthless. Anav, no, you know that you have qualities, and you know you have great qualities. Moses knew that. But you say to yourself, I'm not self-made. God gave me these qualities. Had he given it to someone else, that person would have surpassed and done better than I. The Rebbe goes on there to speak about Purim Katan. In that context, the katnus is the greatness. You get yourself out of the way. Look at the empires of history, the greatest empires. The Roman Empire. Was there a greater empire than that? And it doesn't exist. Because the arrogance, the self-absorption, ultimately was their undoing. The Jewish people, Miman Ofra Yankov, are compared to the dust of the earth. Bittul kenish bottle werden, as the Rebbe once said. Sublimation cannot be sublimated. Sublimation cannot be disappear. Because the more it disappears, the more it's real. So therefore, when you think about joy in that context, so it's not about whether joy can be measured, but joy is a direct outgrowth of humility, of being comfortable in your own skin and not being on an ego trip about who you are. As soon as you're conscious of yourself, joy will never be quite natural. Because the consciousness doesn't allow you to just be yourself, to celebrate yourself. Famous joke, Chelam, a guy goes to the mikveh, and because he thought he had an identity crisis, he said to himself, if I go into the mikveh, into the ritual water, and I get undressed, how will I know who I am once I come out? Because he's identified himself by his clothing. So it's a joke, so just bear with me. So he decides he's going to tie a little red thread around his toe. So when he comes out of the mikveh, he'll look for the red thread, and they'll know who he is. Imagine the person over-identified with his garments. Okay, well, as luck would have it, the little red thread untied from his toe and attached itself to someone else's toe. He comes out of the mikveh, he starts looking for the red thread. He finds it. And he goes over to that guy, he says, I know who you are, but who am I? So this is a classic Chelam joke, which so many of us think, my identity. I see somebody else. Maybe that's what I should be. I see someone this, maybe that's what I should be. Maybe you should just be yourself. But often when you're around people, especially parents or educators who are not comfortable with themselves, it's unlikely that it's going to teach you how to be comfortable with yourself. You're around someone who's comfortable with themselves, it teaches you to be comfortable. And the most important statement is this: you are created personally by God. V'amach kulam tzadikim, your nation are all righteous. Neitzer matoi, they're the handiwork, they're the outgrowth of my handiwork. Ma'aseh yodei lispire, my handiwork that I am proud of. Every human being. Imagine if you really knew that in your gut. Not just you read about it in Tanya or or in a verse in Isaiah or in Pirkei Avos that we say that verse at the beginning of the chapters. You really felt in your gut that God handpicked you and put you here right now in this chair where you're sitting. And you in that chair, me in this chair. If you knew that absolutely in your gut, you have no question. Where am I running? This is where the God, the creator of it all, wants me to be right now. Not in the 20th century, not in the 1st century, in the 21st century, in 2016, on this day of Tezvav Adar Rishon, Tavshin Ayin Vav, February 24th, not 2016, at this moment and right now. And that's why you're here. Figure out what you're supposed to do with this mission. This is something that I grew up around, and I saw the Rebbe live this. My father was in the hospital in 1989, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Tavshin, and in October 1989, he had a mini stroke. It was Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he ended up in the hospital. Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, there's a custom of giving each other sweet cake, honey cake, and Ashana Teva Masukah, you should have a sweet year. So the Rebbe called me and asked that I come. I came to his door. He gave me a piece of honey cake. And I said, this is for your father. Tell him you should have a very sweet year. And then the Rebbe added, and tell him, I'll say it in Yiddish, he said, Sag ihm, als soll verendigen sein Schliches, wo ist, wird man ihm von dort nach Reis lassen. Tell him that he should finish his mission where he is, which was in the hospital, so they'll release him. Think about this. He's in the hospital because he had a stroke. He didn't go to the hospital for a vacation and for the view. He had a stroke. He had no choice. Who wants to be in the hospital? But the Rebbe looked at it. No, at the end of the day, you're there. There's a reason you're there. Just to drive the point home, so I brought the cake to the hospital. I gave it to my father. Told him. My mother started running around and doing what they call mivtzayim, talking this one and that one about you. And my father called her and said, listen, I'm in the hospital. I'm the one that has my mission here. You're just visiting me. So I'm the one that has to figure out what to do. Okay, that's an aside. After Yom Kippur, the day after Yom Kippur, Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's secretary, chief of staff, came to see my father, just to show you that it wasn't a joke. He says the Rebbe wants to know whether you finished your mission yet. And there's hundreds of such stories. There's a tremendous lesson in these stories. You are there. Obviously, you want to get out, but to sit and agonize in the hospital, when can I go home already? Use it for the good. Talk to the doctor about God. Figure out who else is in the room. You never could change people's lives. Similar story with being stuck in someone wrote to the Rebbe, a group, they're stuck in a snowstorm. And the Rebbe said, what do you mean stuck? Nobody's stuck. The snow is an indicator, a message from heaven, that you need to fulfill some of your mission there. How many of us are constantly looking, am I really where I should be? Am I even the person I should be? People say, I wish I were you. If I had those blessings, I'd be very happy. Grass is always greener on the other side. So the concept of being completely comfortable in the here and now, as knowing that this is your divine calling, is the root of all joy. So interestingly, people who are not comfortable in their own skin can read thousands of self-help books on happiness. They're not going to become happy. Just because you go through motions, you don't become happy. You become happy when you are in touch with yourself to the point where you're not consumed with yourself, but you are just doing what you have to be doing. Now, everybody has the capacity to reach there. The question is, what kind of work you need to do. So Purim Katan, to go back to the theme, Purim Katan signifies something. Katan represents not just the small Purim, as in not the significant Purim that we celebrate with all the whole fanfare and all the mitzvahs of reading the Megillah and the Shalach Manos and the Matanos Lavyanim and a festive meal, etc., and Adal Yada, of course. But it also symbolizes something. Purim is joy. The small joy, that joy, real joy, comes when you get yourself out of the way and you're not so big in your own eyes. Someone once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, and said, everybody's stepping all over me. I'm a doormat. People are insulting me. People are constantly humiliating me. And Tzemach Tzedek wisely responded. He says, why do you have to spread yourself over the whole base medrash? So wherever anybody steps, they step on you. In other words, you see yourself everywhere. Maybe you should diminish. Maybe you should stop being everywhere. Obviously, he didn't mean literally. It meant to say, just do what you have to do and be comfortable with what you're doing, and no one's going to step on you. You won't feel that anyone's stepping on you. When do people feel they're stepping on? When they're self-conscious. Someone came to the Kotzker Rebbe with a big complaint and said, Rebbe, you have to help me. I have a business in town, in Kotsk, and it's a successful business, but now somebody opened up a competitor. They'll take away my business. Sogas Gvul. Sogas Gvul means crossing a boundary, like someone has a certain type of income, you cross the boundary and enter their market, so to speak. So there are laws about it. He wanted the Kotzker Rebbe to forbid the guy from staying open. Kotzker Rebbe, in his very sharp, classic style, said to him, you have horses? Yes. You ever take your horses to drink water at the lake? At the water, to water the water hole? Yeah. You ever notice something interesting? When the horse comes to the water, it begins to, before it bends down to drink, it begins to pound its feet. You'll see horses become they get all agitated, and then they go and they bend down and they drink water. What's the matter with what's the horse getting so upset? It's water. The water is there. Go drink it. If the water weren't there, okay, we understand. So the Kotzker Rebbe smiled. He said, you know what the problem is? The horse is so thirsty. It's about to start drinking water. It looks in the water and sees another horse. It thinks the other horse is coming to steal its water. So it starts kicking to try to chase away the other horse. Now, of course, that other horse is a reflection of this horse. And then it realizes there's enough water for both horses. That was his response. That stop being so self-conscious. Do what your business. Continue to succeed. And you'll be fine. Don't see yourself everywhere. So suddenly humility, cotton, is the key to being content. I was once at a conference in Lima, Peru. I remember I shared this, I believe, on happiness. With two speakers, me, myself, from a Jewish point of view, and a Jewish psychologist, professor, he spoke. So what I said, I've been saying during this evening. I'll tell you what he said. There was one thing that struck me very interesting. Two things, actually. He said that he studied in his studies who are the happiest people in the world. The happiest people in the world are in Holland, of all places. Now, just for the record, Holland happened to be one of the only countries that was good to Jews during World War II. Or was it Denmark? But okay, Holland. And more importantly, not World War II, but Holland was New Amsterdam. United States, Jews came here, the first Spanish Jews, because it was welcoming to Jews, because Holland was the colonies, the Dutch colonies. Yeah, until, what's his name, Peter Stuyvesant, started, it was anti-Semitic, but that's another story, right? So in Holland, the people have the highest rate of happiness. And there are different theories. Some say because in Holland everybody has health insurance. It's a socialist country. Others say other reasons. He came up with a theory, the following. He studied, show that the Western world, by the time you're age 20, listen to this, you've seen or heard 1 million advertisements. 1 million advertisements. For everything. In Holland, there are no public advertising. There's no billboards. So he's suggesting, when you have so many things inundating you, buy this, drive this, smoke this, travel here, look like that, it has to create a certain level of deprivation. I don't have all this. Because these advertisers are very good. They make you feel this is important. Now, maybe subliminal, we may not feel it, but it's 100% true. Just for the record, the second thing he pointed out, which I found interesting, he said that when someone gives you $1,000, the joy of receiving $1,000 does not compare to the sadness of losing $1,000. You need 4 times as much, 3 or 4 times as much. You need $4,000 to gain to counter the sadness of losing $1,000. So his suggestion was that for every sad moment, find 4 happy moments to really keep the balance. I found that to be interesting for a different reason. I think the reason for that is because we are naturally happy people, so we naturally feel we deserve things. And that's why when something's taken from us, even a little already bothers us. That's another discussion. But I want to go back to the theme here. So Purim Katan, the sense of getting yourself out of the way. I can tell you myself, personal experience, as a teenager, when I found my calling, which was first working in an encyclopedia and Hasidic thought, and then later in the Rebbe's talks, but it was really the calling of using communication skills, writing, speaking, to help people find their purpose in life. There's a certain peace of mind you reach when you feel that you are fulfilling your mission. And you can almost put that and say, the foundation is in place. I don't have to think about it anymore. And then I see people who struggle their whole lives, they still don't know whether they're doing what they should be doing. So to find your calling is in a way like a foundation. Does anybody do you ever think about the foundation of the building in which you live? Who thinks about foundations? It's invisible to the eye. When someone mentions it to you, you say, yeah, there must be a very powerful foundation because I trust it. I learn. You think about the rooms. Most people are thinking about what the room looks like. The first floor, the second floor, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, the bedroom, this thing, that thing. Foundations, we don't think about. But when it comes to marriage and it comes to real relationships, the foundation is the key. No foundation, you can have 100 beautiful floors and they will not stand. But we live in a cosmetic world, external world. So we focus on these externals. The foundation is the first thing. And once the foundation is in place, you don't have to think about it anymore. You can't imagine what kind of calmness that creates. Because it means that something's in place, I do not have to go back there anymore. Since we have an accountant in the house, when someone says financial security, even though the truth is, Eyev Kesef, La Yizba Kesef, there really no such thing as financial security, because you see, the wealthier people are, the more miserable they are, and they're never satisfied. No one ever says, oh, I've reached my plateau, now I'm happy. 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, and so on. Then you need all the fears and all the anxieties that Mar B'Nechos and Mar B'Daiga, the more acquisitions, the more concerns, then you need an insurance policy, then you need further insurance policy, and then you need to hire a lawyer to watch over your first lawyer, and an accountant to watch the first accountant, because now there's a lot of money, who knows who's what, trust goes out the window, etc., etc. I still think everyone should be blessed with plenty of wealth. But there is a concept when you feel a certain comfort knowing I have the financial wherewithal, foundation, that I don't have to worry. When you don't have that, it's constantly a source of anxiety. I'm just using a simple example. Even though I don't like the idea that finances can never be real foundational because they change. As much as Prudential likes to call it the rock, it's not a rock. And securities are not securities. Securities are eternal securities. Securities, you know what? A relationship that you know is going to be forever with you. Security is knowing you have children that are perpetuating a legacy. Those are securities. The Jewish people have a Torah that's been here for 300 some years. But this world likes to call it securities, just like they call reality TV reality, as if that's reality. Or the words of Walter Matthau. He was showing someone his couch. He says, you know this couch? It's authentic imitation leather. You understand? I was at a table shop and someone says, no, I don't drink Diet Coke. I only drink the real thing. They're convinced that Coke is the real thing, a Diet Coke. It's one fake, and one's a fake of a fake. Fine. But they're convinced that the fake is real. And Diet Coke is, I don't drink. Diet Coke is for the mediocre, it's for the superficial. Coke is the real thing. And I said, it's not Coke, maybe water is the real thing. But that doesn't cost money. And that doesn't have the promise of whatever. As David Raskin, our teacher, used to say, the brown liquid with fizz, with the bubbles, brown liquid. Okay, so going back to our discussion here, happiness. So the foundation, when you know the foundation is in place, then you don't have to worry about it. It's there. It's not going anywhere. You don't have to think about it all the time. There's a peace of mind that comes when you achieve certain milestones like that. And that's the root of real happiness. So really, Purim Katan, in a way, even though I said other is the celebration for Geula purposes, Mismach Geula, but if you want the ingredient that defines true happiness, it's Katan. It's being humble in your own eyes. Don't make yourself such a big mitzias. Don't make yourself such a big entity. Don't make yourself a target. Be humble. Be at peace with who you are. The secret of being real. Have you ever been in the presence of somebody that's completely comfortable with themselves? I remember once Friedrich Wyszynski was a photographer, Russian photographer, used to photograph the Rebbe a lot. He once wanted to give me a photograph as a gift, so I asked him, give me the best photograph you have of the Rebbe. And he was a real artist. He developed his own film, he had this thing, he used to spend months framing, casing a certain pose. He was a real artist. He gave me a picture of the Rebbe, sitting Tisha B'Av on a low stool with a lamp, reading Kinnis, reading the Lamentations that we say on the saddest day of the year. So I asked him, why is this your favorite photo? So he says, look closely at the Rebbe. You look, and he says, here's a man sitting in a room with a few thousand people, and when you look at him, you don't know that there's anyone in the room. He says, there's no such thing. I photographed thousands of people. That when a person is alone, they look one way, and when they're in a room with others, no matter how controlled they are, they don't look the same way. He says, here he's in the same room with all the people. It's exactly as if he's sitting alone. He's completely comfortable. It's where he's supposed to be. So who cares whether there's 1 million people watching or no one watching? It doesn't make a difference. These are people of God, of course. A man of God knows every moment that he's here on a mission. So whether we can be on that level, no. But we can be at moments on that level. Find something to do that you know while you're doing it is exactly what you should be doing. When you have that, there's an expression in Pirkei Avos, a beautiful expression. It says, L'chol. I'm trying to remember. Everything has its time. Everything has its place. L'chol is... Yeah. You know what I'm referring to? I saw a siddur. I'd look, okay. That knowing that you are here in this time, in this place, is exactly because God wants you to be here. If you knew that clearly, there'd be a certain element of peace, and therefore element of serenity, and an element of real joy. Now in truth, for the record, in the Hasidic discourses, Samach Tasamach, Tafresh Nun Zayin is a discourse the Rebbe Rashab said at the wedding of his son, 1897, right. 1897. And other places of Hasidic thought talks the difference between Tainug and Simcha. Tainug is considered pleasure, and Simcha is joy. So Shabbos is connected more to Tainug, Kross l'Shabbos Einug, and Moedim l'Simcha, holidays are joy. So it explains in Hasidic thought that pleasure is more of a state of being, of inner contentment, and joy is an expression of that contentment. That's why holidays, which associate more with joy, the real mitzvah of guests, because Simchas Krise, you can't do joy alone. You can't have a wedding and celebrate alone. Joy compels us to bring others into the picture. Pleasure does not. You can sit with a book, with a sefer, and learn. You don't need anyone there. You can listen to music. You don't need anyone there. So really it breaks into two parts. And of course, Moedim Simcha, Purim Simcha, is more connected to the joy part, but still, joy is an outgrowth of that inner state of contentment. So, my friends, can you measure joy? Yeah, you can measure it not by how much you dance and scream and how high you jump and how loud the music is. You measure joy by measuring yourself, by recognizing that you are part of a bigger reality and being at peace with that. Knowing that God doesn't have to ask you, Ayeka, where are you? Because you know where you are. You are in the place you should be in fulfilling your calling. People who have that are the happiest people. Because they don't need things to make them happy. They don't need stimulation. They don't need outer stuff. Sad people go out there, look for something to make me happy. Come, make me happy. So they have television and they have internet and they have this entertainment, that entertainment, and this distraction, that distraction. Ultimately, our goal is not to go ahead and find new tools. It's how do you get yourself out of the way to go back to the inner core of who you really are. That's the real challenge. Because as I said, we're born content. We're born as children. What you see is what you get. It's seamless, happy, they're comfortable in their own skin. Children are not conscious of themselves. Then we become very conscious of ourselves. The question is, how do you go back to who you really are? Which makes it a lot easier. Because if you said joy is something I have to go find somewhere, you may or you may not find, but it's right here. So it comes back down to the cotton. As soon as you become a cotton, that you know that you have no light of your own, you're only a reflection of something greater than you are, that is how you go back. That's what contentment comes from. That's where real inner joy comes from. Going back to a state where you are simply a messenger, an ambassador for God in this world. Recognizing that you're not here to serve yourself, you're here to serve something greater than yourself. That's what a cotton is. Something that is diminished in its own eyes. And then cotton godly. When you are complete absorber and a reflector of something greater than you are, so that thing that's greater than you are is eternal, you become an extension of eternity. An arrogant ego can only be that big. It can be big, but it's not going to be forever big. And it's not going to be infinitely big because it's filled with itself. It's defined by itself. Whereas humility is an inversion. It's a diminishing of self. And the more you diminish, the more you absorb something greater than yourself, so you can be a channel, a transparent channel for something that's completely eternal, completely immortal. So we have then this month of Adar, Rishon, the first Adar, that prepares us for the next one. Then when we have this type of sense of humility, sense of self, sense of suspension of self in face of something greater, then when we enter the second Adar and the Purim that it brings, you can celebrate in a very powerful way. Which is interesting. Humility, you'd think, is the opposite of celebration. Humility is more somber, serious, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But it's not true. It's a state of withdrawal, but what it leads to is an unbelievable amount of celebration. And the more humble you are, the greater you will celebrate. Because it's not a celebration, that's a distraction. What do they say? Some people dance to remember, and some people dance to forget. We're not talking about dancing to forget, we're talking about dancing to remember. Dancing to forget is an escape from a sad, resigned reality. So you drink to forget. The Zalman the Shikar, we had our own local drunk in Crown Heights, and he would say, people drink in order to drown their tsaras, to drown their anxieties. And then you find out that tsaras float. So you can't drown them. They come right up. They float. Yeah, that's the story. So some people dance to remember, some people dance to forget. We're talking about dancing to remember. A joy and a celebration that comes from experiencing something far greater than you are, as opposed to a joy that's coming to mask or conceal some momentary, or if not momentary, long-term pain or anxiety. So cotton, that's it, the story of cotton, the story of the smallness of something. As the Alter Rebbe said, they say about the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Chassidus, he said, They say about him that he was able to show the Greiskeit in Yad the Kleinigkeit, the greatness of every small thing, and the Kleinigkeit from Yad the Greiskeit, and the smallness of every great thing. In other words, not to be overwhelmed by big things. No, everything is humble, and the small little things can be the greatest things if you see them in the right light. So God bless everybody to be comfortable in your own skin. Toast to be comfortable in your own skin. It's a great blessing, because when you do that, you're comfortable in your own skin. You make other people comfortable, and you focus where you should focus instead of focusing on other things. All the vices, envy, jealousy, which is envy, malice to others, not forgiving, meaning not forgiving. I translate that as not affording someone of success. All these vices and petty vices all come because a person is not comfortable. If I'm not comfortable myself, I don't want you to be comfortable. I'm comfortable with my own skin. I'm comfortable with myself. Why do you have to be wrong for me to be right? You see people are very insecure that everyone has to be wrong for them to be right. A very comfortable person says, that's my position. You have a different position. Gesundheit. God bless you. Your fact that you don't agree with me doesn't make my position less valuable. That's comfortable. So should all be comfortable. Take this month of Adar and revisit our little childhood when we were once not self-conscious. Maybe we should look at our young children, our grandchildren, and learn from them. Instead of having them learn from us, why don't we learn from them? They are closer to the truth than we are. So why are we trying to shape them into us? You know, as I mentioned, technology, iPhone 6 is better than iPhone 5. But in life, version 1, the child, is better than version 5. Would you agree? So it's interesting how technology works. They keep telling you it's getting better and better. I was once on a plane. I was traveling to Israel. And across the aisle, I saw an older man, and I saw apparently a very young man. He tells me he's his grandson. We start talking. He's flying with his grandfather. He's accompanying him to Israel out of respect to him. So I said, very admirable to see young people, such respect. You don't see that today. Usually. So the guy says, absolutely. Usually grandfathers are flying to escort their grandchildren. Here he's escorting him. And he tells me in Hebrew, he says, it's very simple. They believe in the theory of evolution. So the farther back you go, the closer to the ape you are. So the father should be respecting the child because the child is more evolved than the father. We believe that Adam and Eve and Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were greater than we are. So the farther back you go, the better they are. So my grandfather's closer to the real version than I am. Interesting. It was a very interesting take on how, the devaluing of human beings. So that's what it's like. That we have what to go back to is our own childhood. I've once shared that I think a good exercise is take out a photo. Well, I'll tell you where the story came. I suggest take out a photo of yourself as a young child, before 1 year old, and ask yourself, how did that become this? Think about it. Now, I'm not suggesting we have to regress to childhood, but there's a purity, an innocence, a seamlessness, a non-self-consciousness. Maybe I have it in my mind because my grandchildren are coming from California tonight to spend the week with us. So maybe I feel, that type of feeling. But I must say, it's not just my grandchildren, but all children. I think is the best education. They say history is the best teacher. Some say experience is the best teacher. I think children are the best teachers. You have to study them. I am amazed. It's the pure version of everything we do. If you want to know how to react to something, look how children react. You give them something, enthusiasm. There's a smile. And only when they see bitterness and sadness around them, then they assume that. But on their own, they're excellent. Enthusiastic about narishka, small things. I asked my granddaughter once, I said, it was an experiment. I said, I'd like to give you a gift. She came running. What's the gift? I said, $100 million. She literally turned her back on me and ran away. If I had said a Barbie doll, what do they call, Lego, a puzzle, video, whatever, a new Uncle Moshe and the Mitzvah Men thing, she would have been the happiest person on earth. $100 million, she didn't care about it. So I said, so who got it right? So we think, most people say, because she doesn't appreciate $100 million, you can get 100 million videos, you know, whatever. No, it's because money is a false, artificial thing that human beings created. I understand we need money to survive, but it's symbolic of our power and our success. It's ego, that's what it is. And a child just knows what it is. Another story, I was once speaking, it happened to be an academic conference. So I was speaking on some highfalutin topic, like something like, I don't remember any, the philosophy of the cosmos or something. Think of it that way, you know. And it was a group of around 150 people. Now they also had a service for people who had children. So next door there was a babysitting service, you know, okay. But these were academics, and you know, and I felt proud talking to them. Suddenly 2 children run into the room. So in this whole, everybody was silent, and I was speaking. The 2 children, as you know, children are oblivious of speeches. And they're making a whole racket. People were yelling, get out. And even I had a tinge of like, you know, 1 second, we're talking about these very important topics. Why are the children not respectful of this adult? And then it didn't take me more than 5 seconds. And I broke into a smile, and my heart melted. And I said to all the distinguished professors and wizards and doctors and academics, I said, you know something? I know I'm giving a speech here that everybody's looking forward to, but we had the biggest lesson in life right now. Why a speech like I'm giving now, that everybody thinks is so important, the children don't value it? So most of you would say, because children are inferior. They don't grasp the power of intelligence. I said, no, it's the exact opposite. It's because children are natural, and it's unnatural for a human being to get up on a stage with a microphone and speak to everybody else. Children don't. You ever see children do that? You ever see a child getting up with a microphone and I'm going to give a speech to everybody? Unless they're copying adults, they don't do that. Because children are equals. We're interacting. Children like to play with it. We don't want to. Maybe a speech, the concept of a lecture that we adults created, is a very nice play toy for us to make us feel smart. I was actually insulting them, and myself for that matter, but I'm convinced of that. Do something natural with children, they'll be there. A speech, what is this guy standing on with a microphone? What does he think, you know, what is this? Children want love. They want nurturing. Feed me, cuddle me, nurture me, hug me. This is language that children relate to. And this is the language really of the human race, the things we need most. Ask anyone, if you had preference, that your mother should hug you in the early stage of your life or should give you a lecture. Which one would you think is the one that's going to work for a child? You know, even if it's a nice lecture. You sit down, your children, I'm going to speak now to you guys for an hour and then I'll take questions. Children won't hang around. Anyway, you get the point. So you could probably imagine by now that I'm a fan of children. The hearts of the parents will return through the children. That's Malachi's prophecy. So God should bless us all. We should be wise and learn joy from our children and not project on them our disappointments and sadness and resignations and cynicism and jadedness, etc., etc., etc. We'll be far better off. And maybe that's why in the Sheva Brachos we say, Kisamechecha yitzircha b'gan eden mekedem. You know, Kisamechecha yitzircha. Think of the words. Like the joy of Yitzircha, the one that formed you, shaped you, in Mekedem, Gan Eden, before Chet Eitzadas, before the consciousness. Because we want marriage to be like Adam and Eve in the garden before the sin. Meaning before, kind of just a pure place where 2 people who totally trust each other and don't have the self-consciousness that the world has with each other are just become one. That's the ultimate purpose, total unity. Seamlessness. So in this month of Adar, may we celebrate many simchas and joys, which all comes to the real joy from Simchas Elam Al Resham, which is a joy that comes from within, from our inner sense of belonging. L'chaim, everybody.